Come on, everybody. Here we go. Off to Neverland.
When people think of Walt Disney, they think of Bambi, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and Cinderella. Walt Disney viewers range from young children in average households to young men in national armies to full-grown adults.
What people don't know is that the time period that his company thrived in was the same time of a dreadful war that threatened the life of half the world. 1937, the same year that the film Snow White was released in theaters, was also the year that Adolf Hitler revealed war plans in Germany, announcing the Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, which was one of the first attacks on the Jewish society by the Nazis.
If you ask a person raised in the time of the 40s to the 60s, they'll tell you about life back then, which included different prices for groceries, different celebrities, different rules, different fashion, different behavior than you would find today.
And it was considered normal to see images that today would be deemed as racist, prejudiced, and unacceptable. It was the trend back then.
With the massive war coming, it meant there were plenty of commercials and stereotypes between nations on radios and televisions. Hate was broadcasted as a way to recruit soldiers. Over 400,000 U.S. soldiers died during World War II. Each and every one of them faced propaganda and media constantly in their homes.
World War II is known to be one of the deadliest wars in history. Many significant events happened during that time period. Its death count reaches over 70 million. Jews represented 16% of the total casualties because of an event called the Holocaust. Entertainment during this time was both crucial and rare. And who indeed was the main producer of this precious jewel?
Every day, people get physically hurt and emotionally hurt by racism every day. Even today, racism is still a problem. The main sources of racism are your peers, family, books, magazines, TV, and music. Even though you might not agree to racism, you could be unconsciously brainwashed to think a certain way.
Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil, boy! I'm from South Germany.
Such was the purpose of movies like Reason and Emotion, a 1943 film made by the Disney Company, which purpose was to explain to the American public how Adolf Hitler was trying to control his armies with fear, sympathy, pride, and hate.
It should not be surprising that Walt Disney made such films, for at the same times it was considered not only important but necessary for the patriotic families to see them. However, the same words cannot be said for the nature documentary created in 1958. That won an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. It was focused on the myth of lemming suicides. The narrator in the film explained that the lemmings were actually attempting to migrate across the Arctic Ocean, when in 1982, an expert said lemmings do not migrate, let alone swim across oceans. It was also discovered that the lemmings in the film were actually pushed off by a rotating platform. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation News magazine noted the film for animal cruelty.
While the Lemming documentary was playing in family homes, some of Walt's movies were being featured in a much more different place. Disney made many instructional videos for the Army during World War II. In fact, some people say that his company would have gone bankrupt if it wasn't for those videos. Snow White and Dumbo, both popular family films, were financial disappointments. Snow White made $66 million, which was $1,500 under its preferred gross revenue. They were both released during the Depression and cost more than $1 million to make. To raise money for these weapons, the government needed higher taxes, so they encouraged people to buy war bonds, which are basically loans to the government from citizens who pay. If you give the bank $100, by the time the war is over, you would have gotten twice that amount back.
A 1942 cartoon featured many of Disney's favorites all participating together to encourage people to buy war bonds. Before Pearl Harbor, war bonds were called defense bonds. However, they yielded barely 2.9% return after a 10-year warranty. People could also buy stamps at 10 cents each for the war effort. By the end of the war, half the population of America had purchased $1,857 billion. The Walt Disney Company was taken over by the government and was hired to make videos beneficial to the government. Some videos made by Walt Disney Company seem worse than others, but is it really all Walt's doing? After all, he did have the whole company working with him. Who else is working behind the scenes to make these videos? Even at a young age, Walt Disney was interested in war. At the age of 16, he ran to fight in the army, but was turned away, and he drove an ambulance instead. It was during this job he met a dear friend called eBay and started his artistic career. In 1920, Disney and iWorks formed an amateur company called iWorks Disney Commercial Artists. It was unsuccessful, and Disney moved to Kansas City. Up until then, Walt Disney only created drawings on paper, but when he was hired by Kansas Ad Film Company, he became fascinated by animation and learned how to do cutout animation, which is making videos using images and backgrounds cut from paper. However, Walt soon became hungry for something new, and he made his own animation studio. He found cell animation a much better technique than cutout animation. He left the Kansas City Film and Ad Company and his friend eBay.
Cell animation, which basically comprised doing drawings and sketches of characters, but to do the animation they would draw the characters and parts of the characters on individual cells made of basically cellophane.
With a fellow co-worker called Fred Harmon, the two managed to get a local theater to air their cartoons. They call their work Laugh-O-Grams. Newman Laugh-O-Gram Studio was popular in Kansas City. The profit was high enough that Walt Disney was able to hire additional animators. However, the studio eventually became bankrupt. Walt then moved to Hollywood. It was then that his brother Roy Disney expressed the same love for animation. The two combined forces and created a legacy. Among their accomplishments together includes the Alice Bunnies, which were live-action and animated videos starring a girl called Alice.
The birth of Mickey Mouse came from an earlier version of him called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Unfortunately, Universal, not Disney, owned the beloved character and Disney lost him. He needed something new to replace him.
With the birth of Mickey Mouse at his first feature-length video called Steamboat Willie, Walt had a popular streak and created other successful features like Popeye the Sailor Man, Silly Symphonies, and soon after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The videos you see today aren't really from Walt Disney. The man lived in a time where his videos and movies were needed differently than today. After he died in 1966, movies like The Aristocats, Robin Hood, and The Little Mermaid were released. When he was alive, however, you saw for yourself how different his movies were.
People should always be aware of the past. History is the future, and the future is your life. There used to be a time where you were persecuted and abused for who you were, whether it was your skin color, religion, or your sexuality. Walt Disney did not think differently.
Movies made by Walt Disney Company are different from the videos he himself produced. Whenever you watch Beauty and the Beast or Winnie the Pooh, think of the past and ensure your future. Images, after all, are just as powerful as words.